Hi, I'm Josh from Workflow Power. We're a Monday.com channel partner and advanced delivery partner. Over the last few years, we've been implementing Monday from CRM to full-scale enterprise workflows. Today, I'm going to take you through the 5 workflow starters that we regularly use as a base for our implementation and consulting engagements. I'll take you step by step how you can build these out and how you can apply it to pretty much any use case or any industry that is using Monday. The best part is you can access this full workflow starter solution that we run through today for free by clicking the link in the description of this video below. Let's get into it and start building out this 5 workflow starter foundation for Monday. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is create a new workspace. So if you're in Monday, the process to create a workspace by clicking the blue button here. And I've already created my new workspace called Workflow Foundation Demo. Now, once I have a blank workspace, my typical starting point with any type of structure that I want to create is to typically go through my folder process. So my folder process would typically allow me to structure my workflow or my workspace in a seamless and organized way. So if you've seen any other of my videos, this is typically how we would start an implementation, workspace, structure, and then folders for organization. So what I'm going to do in this demo is walk you through our 2 folders here we've created. We've got our high level overview, which is kind of going to control our zoomed out master, and then we've got our low level workflows. In our low level workflows, we also combine some structures where we combine high level and low level, but we'll just place them in this folder for ease. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to create our master overview. So when we look at a master overview, one of the really critical things that we're going to want to establish here is a zoomed out big picture view of anything that's happening across our workflow. So in this example, you can see we've created our new master overview board here, and we're going to start building out some different elements to this workflow that's going to make sense. So whenever we're structuring or building a new workflow, we always start with that logical foundation: workspace, folder, board, and then we start aligning what the groups should be within that board. So in this example here, we've got some simple groups. We've got upcoming, we've got active, and we've got completed. I'm going to delete this existing group that was there when the board was created. We're then going to start adding some columns that are going to provide some clarity around our zoomed out high level view. Now, a high level example may be projects that we're tracking. So each project can become one line item in the board, but that line item could be a person, it could be an initiative, it could be a goal, really just to give us that clarity at a high level zoomed out kind of structure. So you can see here as we've added some columns, we're going to go through and add some items. We've got representing kind of different projects. We might represent different jobs down here in active. And then, we could list things like initiatives potentially. The benefit of what happens in the master overview is that it gives you big picture. So it gives you that zoomed out view of things that might be happening. The next best thing that this kind of workflow can be useful for, or this structure, is the ability to trigger different workflows from that master overview. It can be your trigger point to initiate automations that are going to then create other things or initiate other activities or tasks within your workflow. So the first foundation point you want to start is always kind of with a high level overview. Now, with your high level overview, this is where, as we get down into the different workflow types, is how you can combine the master overview or the high level and the low level in different ways. And that's what we're going to run over now in terms of what that structure looks like. Now, the first one we're going to do is typically like a one that's not regularly used by people, but it is a good structure, especially when you're looking at potential scale and what plan you're on with Monday. So as you scale out particular workflows, for example, if I have a project that gets initiated every time we commence a piece of work, that may, again, initiate a project timeline, activities, tasks. The most common way, which we'll show you with option 2, is to put that all into a single board. With option 1 here that we're doing, we open this up, we've called it one board with groups. Now what you'll notice here is that as we kind of delete this existing group out, is that in this example, we would be building out a solution where every time our kind of project or job kicks off, it would be creating a new group in that board from a template. So we're leveraging one board for all our projects, and then we're syncing that up to our master overview. So as we go through here, you can see that we've created a group called auto trigger, one called template, and we've just got some dummy jobs in here. Now what we want to do obviously is build some relevant columns out that would apply to, for example, a job or a project timeline. And typically the place you want to start is columns. So build out the columns that make sense for that particular workflow that you want to track, and then build out the template group. So in this example, you can see we've built out our columns. We're now heading down to our template, and this is where we want to create some items. So within those items, we might want to create a task that we're kicking off. So you can see in this example, we've set the task item to kick off. We've set some dummy data in here. So whether it's hours, what stage it is, and potentially even a timeline. So as we put these in, this is essentially going to formulate our base template. So let's go through and then see how we can configure this. So we're going to mark these all as not started. We've got our template, we've got our auto trigger, and then we would have our jobs here. What I would do within this board is I would create a new view. So I'm going to go at the top here. I'm going to create a table. I'm going to rename this. I'm going to call it template. I'm now going to filter this. So I'm going to filter it, and let's say I only want to see my template, and I'm going to save that. That becomes my template for this particular workflow. This can become really powerful, and again, you don't have to use one board. You might have, say, 3 or 4 boards that represent different project types grouped together. So here we're going to say, okay, we've got our template. Maybe we now want our all jobs view. So let's rename this and let's call it all jobs. We're going to pin this, and then we're going to filter this one by, we go to our advanced filters. We're going to say when the group is not, so we want it to exclude the template and the auto trigger. Now that is going to just show us a view of all our jobs. If we go in here and we add a task to job Y, this will then show up in this view. So the next thing we're going to do is we've got our template, we've got our auto trigger group here. We're going to add one automation. So we're going to go automate, and we're going to go to create a custom automation. In this example here, all we're looking to do is that when something gets created, so we're going to say when item is created, and then we're going to chain it to a conditional. If that item is in auto trigger, we're going to duplicate our template, and then we're going to create it. So you can see what we've done there is we've created a workflow starting point. And I want to stress the importance of simplicity in structure, thinking about structure first and then layering on the functionality and the automations. So we've got that automation in there. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to come to our master overview, and we want to connect those two things together. So we're going to use our connect boards column. We're going to select our board here, so our one board with groups. We're going to create a two-way connection, which means it puts that column not only in this board, but in that other board. And then we're going to create a mirror column from this. So potentially we want to let's bring in progress of all those tasks. So let's say this is our one board with groups, and this is progress. Now, what we then want to trigger is we want to create the automation that's going to put that task or that job into that auto trigger board that's then going to duplicate the group and kick off our work. So we go to automate again in our master overview. We're going to create one from scratch, and we're going to say when our workflow status changes to on board with groups, we're going to create an item in a board. So we're going to look for our one board with groups in here, and then we're going to create an item in our auto trigger group. We don't need to map anything other than the name. We click done and we click create. Now that's set up, we can go, okay, for project C, we want to kick off our board with groups workflow. It's going to go down and it's going to run that automation. It's going to go into here, into our auto trigger. You can see it's linked project C, and it's gone through and it's duplicated that set of template tasks that we've set up in that board. So we've now got a project that can be kicked off within that workflow in one board. So now what I can do is I can go through and rename this project C. I can set the color of this group to something that I want, say for example like this. I could have these closed up if I wanted. So for example, this gives you kind of a good summary view in this board of kind of how all the jobs are tracking. Another good like high level view that you can potentially use. You can use the expanded view to kind of track tasks. Another great feature we can use is the ability to kind of create a dedicated view for this project. So let's create another table view when this project's kicked off, and let's rename it project C. We can then filter this. Okay, I just want to see, let's say when the group is project C. Save it. And we're going to use the group by functionality in Monday to group it by stage. And we're going to save it. We now have our project split up, not into its default view where it's just one list of tasks in a group. We've got a grouped view showing us it's grouped by stage here. So we can now see everything that's happening across this grouped view, much more like a project structure in its own board. And it gives you the visibility just in a single board. Some really good benefits with this obviously is overcoming any connection limits to a overview or a high level summary or other boards that you're using in your workflow. And also the ability to create dedicated people views or team views or filtered views across all projects on kind of what people need to do. So super powerful. And also if you're connecting into dashboards and reporting, you can also overcome some of those issues around limits. The last thing I want to do is I want to connect this up into that job. So I'm going to use my master overview link here. I'm going to select these 5 tasks and I'm going to link them up to project C. I'm going to say these are in progress, blocked, whatever it is. And this is going to give me that progress summary up here in my master overview. So you can see that's a really kind of simple structure that we've just created on the fly there to really drive home that there's not always one way to do things. And there may be a combination of these different workflows you put together. And this is a really powerful, underutilized structure that can be, really leveraged for your particular workflow. Now, the next one we're going to do is we're going to look at a more common workflow, which is our board that we want to kick off for every kind of process that starts. So in this example, it's much more structured, rigid. It gives you that one board for every type of workflow that's going to kick off. Say, for example, you have a particular process or a set of processes that when you start, you want a new board created. This is where this structure would make sense. So in this example, when the other one we had, our groups representing the different projects. Here we're looking at our groups representing the different stages of work. And so this is going to give you a dedicated board that's going to hold all that information. Some of the benefits of this approach is obviously you get dedicated kind of split out views or boards if you need to limit visibility into certain projects or private projects off. It's much easier to kind of Gantt chart and do things like baselining where it's its own dedicated project. So it's really about being aware of like what are the key requirements structure wise, because it will influence kind of what approach you use. Now in this example, we're using 3 groups. We've got planning. We've added in very similar columns to what we've had before. We've started to add some tasks in, and these can like represent the different stages that we're working through in this particular activity or task. You can see we're going through planning. We've got some tasks in execution. We've got some things in closure. Now we're starting to build out this kind of template or base structure. Now, this should be the most common standard approach of how you would build a workflow in Monday. What's really powerful with this is obviously you can create the different views. We can create our Gantt chart and we can start to customize what that looks like. So we can set our data here, what we're going to group it by. We group it by group, what we'd label it by name, color it by status. As we start to add dates in here, we can start how that build out our specific timeline or our dependent workflow. So we can see as that falls into there. Now this structure, again, if you're running hundreds and hundreds of projects, can become problematic if you are connecting back up, both into a dashboard and into a master overview or high level view that we are here. My next step again would be to go back, and we're going to say in this board, we're going to connect it up to our master overview. So I'm going to select my board here and I'm going to create a 2-way connection. And then that gives me that connection point up into our master overview. Again, in this example, I'm showing you multiple workflows at a lower level connected up into our master overview. Potentially you would only have one, so you're not going to have these multiple connect board columns here. The next thing I'd want to do is maybe I want to mirror in status on this one, and let's call this status. Now, the next thing that I want to do after I have this kind of foundation set is potentially I want to convert this into a template. So that means it's going to be repeatable over and over and over again. So I'm going to save it as a template. You can have the ability to kind of duplicate and keep that original in the workspace or move it to the template area. If you're on kind of enterprise or different functionality, there's obviously managed template functionality. We're just going to demonstrate the standard template today. And then we're going to call this workflow demo template. And then we're going to click create. Now that's going to pick up that board and it's going to move it into our template center. So we're going to see it disappear, and that's now going to be gone, but available in our template center to like edit or access when we need to use it. The next thing we're going to do is we'll create another folder and we'll call this our option 2 projects. And we're going to go back to our master overview and we're going to create one other automation. So we're going to hit automate. We're then going to click create automation, and we're going to say when status changes. So we've got our workflow to board for each process. We're going to create a board from a template. So we're going to type in create board. Going to click create a board from a template. We're going to hopefully pick up that. There it is, our workflow demo. We're going to map in the item name. So this would be the project name in our master overview. And we're going to put it in that option 2 projects folder. So we're going to click done. We're going to click create. And now we've set up workflow 1, where we've got projects in our board with groups. We've set up a template, which is workflow option number 2, and how that's then going to translate into a repeatable project process. Now, when I hit for job X that we want to board for each process, it's going to go through and it's going to create a new project off that template, and it's going to put it in that folder for us. So we now have job X created here. So we can see it's inherited that exact same structure we just looked at. We're going to select all our tasks here, and then we're going to connect them up to our job X. I'm going to click that, and we're going to have a connection point there. When we go back up into our master overview, we can see that status being mirrored up the top here. Now, this is the simplest example of a high level, low level structure, and two different ways you can leverage it using boards. Our board with groups, where every job is every project or job or initiative is a group in that board, and there's different ways we can visualize that. Really great for overcoming connection limits and ensuring that there's visibility in just like a simple approach rather than high level volume of boards. Our next one is where we'd create a board for each process, and we're going to set that up, and each time it happens, it's going to create from a template. Two really kind of simple approaches in terms of structure. The next ones we're going to look at combine kind of high level, low level into single boards or multiple boards. And they're also like a good indication of how you can run potentially option 1 and option 2 in conjunction with these three other options that we're going to show you. So the first thing that we're going to look at is our kind of sub items, where we have a vertical structure, and within that structure, like we just looked at in our master overview, we're going to run a sub item type approach where every project represents a line item, but the tasks and activities are nested underneath. So this option here is very powerful when you have like a quick workflow, or it doesn't require its own dedicated board and you want to enhance visibility really easily. In this approach, some different things that we would look to do is, again, run our groups very similar to what we've set up in our master overview before. So here we've got our upcoming, we've got our active, and you may have a completed or something similar. We're going to start adding different columns here. So very similar to our structure that we had within our master overview. So we're going to look at, okay, well, what sub items are we going to run underneath? What things make sense in terms of columns, and what data do we want to collate at that particular level? Some things that to be aware of here is like, what are the columns that make sense? What columns do you want to build out in that workflow? And what do you want to ladder up from the sub item level? So you can see here we've added 4 columns: assignee, the status, priority, and the completed date. Now, you'll notice that we haven't added as many columns at the item level. Because we're going to drive a lot of this workflow from the sub item level, we're going to use the roll up functionality to bring up things like timeline, which can aggregate what's the full timeline down at the sub item level. We're also going to bring up other columns that would make sense to do down at that sub item level. Now, you can see here in the same way that we've been tracking in our master overview, what type of thing are we going to track? For example, project, for example, job, maybe it's initiative. So different types of structures you can create here, depending on what you want to see. Now, as we go down to the sub item level, again, we can start creating different tasks here. Now, this is where you'll see will differ from option 1 and option 2, where we have a separate board moved away from our master overview. In this example, we're combining it. So we're saying, okay, we want to use a vertical structure where we create sub items underneath for particular tasks and activities that we need to execute. Now, the benefit of this is that once we've got sub items created, we can start to ladder up different data. So for example, we may want to show like what's the dates. So what's the date range? We may also want to ladder up like the status here. So let's show this summary on the parent item. So we can show say task status. So this is how we can start to see our workflow connect in different ways. We can nest data underneath, same type of structure that we looked at before, but visualized in a different way. Now, this type of approach is best used when the workflow is essentially quick. You potentially don't need a whole project board. Potentially you're struggling with like adoption issues or people not wanting to, access different boards or visualize things in different ways. This approach can keep it all really streamlined and make it much easier to manage. Some of the key automations here, or probably the most key automation, is the ability to template up like what the sub-item tasks are. So we can say here, this trigger could be linked to creation of the item in this board, or it could be linked to a particular status. We're going to use the create sub-item functionality to say, when this kicks off, we want to create task 1, and then we want to create task 2, and then we want to create task 3. So this essentially becomes your template for the jobs that get entered here. So where you can become a bit trickier with this is, okay, when something comes in and it's a particular type, maybe we want to create these sub-items. When it's a particular job type like this, we want to create different sub-items. So now we can see how we can start to vary our structure. So when I go into here and I say, okay, I've got project D, it's now going to go through and it's going to auto create those sub items underneath for me. So you can see I've got my kind of template structure here already being populated for me based on that particular information. This structure, simple yet powerful, and it also might be the case where you combine the vertical with the sub items with one of our options that we discussed below. So maybe you have a checklist of items at a high level that gets captured in this master overview and then nested at the sub item level. Maybe you're then creating a one board with groups or its own board as well to capture more of the details. So there's no specific right way to do it, and you can definitely combine and mix these up together to create different structures that would work for you. Now, the next one we're going to look at is personally one of my favorites in terms of different approaches and ways it could work. Now, this solution we've used across new product development, store openings, marketing, whole different range of workflows where this can be really powerful. And we call this the horizontal kind of checklist approach. Within this structure, there's a few things to be aware of, and it also can become super powerful for those people who potentially are coming from a spreadsheet. They might even be struggling with the adoption of Monday, or they may be looking at how do we transition a team in really easily without disrupting the process and making the change management too hard. Now, in the horizontal with checklist approach, and we open this up, again, we want to start with our groups. In this example, we'll have a few more groups, and these groups are essentially tied to different stages of the workflow. Now, as we go through here, you can see we're going to list some different ones related to different project stages. So we're creating kickoff, requirements, design. We're going to dev sprint 1, a dev sprint 2. Again, these can be applied to any type of workflow structure. They don't have to be aligned to this. You can build out your groups in any way that makes sense. I'm going to move these around just to put them kind of in logical order, so we can then work through what this potential workflow would look like. Let's put kickoff right up the top. Let's put our requirements below that. And then we're going to go maybe into design. We're going to go into maybe our dev sprint 1. And then we'll do dev sprint 2. Maybe we'll go into delivery. we'll do QA, and then maybe we'll do a UAT, and then our docs at the end. So let's now delete this group down the bottom that we don't need. Again, we've started with that logical approach. So workspace, board, group, then column. And you'll notice in this example, what we're doing, we've got our kind of standard assignee, what our status is, our timeline, our budget, effort. And then we've got status columns that represent the different stages that we're going through. So where you're looking for a workflow that's really simple, not super task intensive. That is, I don't need the tasks assigned to everyone. I don't need that granular detail to hold up the execution of the work or the way that we're working. We just want to visually track and see exactly what's happening. Now, this is the perfect structure to do that. And again, this structure can also be combined with our option 1 really well to drive these status columns here when our potential groups or activities that we're doing, that if we do want to track tasks when they get ticked off, can drive the statuses in here to completion or to kind of different stages depending on what we want to do. Now here you can see we're adding in some projects and different activities so we can track kind of where they're at in terms of this process. Now you'll see the columns here would align to the groups. So I'd set up my groups. I would then set up my status columns to align with those groups so I can move these items through this workflow as these columns get updated. Now, really simply how you can set up the start of these automations to achieve this. And again, if you want the full solution, it's free. You can access all the automations in this structure and use it for your workflows. Just click the link below this video in the description and you'll be able to access all the automations set up in full. What I would do here is I'm really looking at, okay, when this kickoff, for example, goes to completed, I want to change this status here to the next workflow point, requirements, and then I want to put requirements in progress. So let's go ahead and look at how we would do that. So I'd go into automate, I'm going to create one from scratch, and I'm going to say when my status changes, so kickoff changes to completed, I want to change my primary status to requirements, and I'm going to click create. Now, I like to decouple some of the automations. So for example, you could add another like move item to this group to the bottom of this automation. I personally like to decouple them, especially if things change. You've got a really simple approach in terms of logical structure and how to change things, as opposed to have to going into chained automations. I would create another automation here that says when status changes to requirements, I'm going to move item to group. I'm going to move it to requirements. Now, we've got those two automations set up. The other thing that I would change to this is obviously we set this to requirements, this main status. I might also want to change the requirement status to in progress because now that's starting. Now you could do multiple things off the back of here. You could notify someone, you can create a checklist item, which I'll show you in our hybrid. Multiple different ways you can do things in this approach. Now with our kickoff one here, for example, when we go completed, what it's going to do is first change this to requirements. It's going to put it to in requirements, and then it's going to move it down to requirements. So you see here how we have a really simple approach to structure this in a way that makes sense. Now down at my sub item level, what I would personally like with this approach is let's delete all these columns out. Now you could use variants of this. You could use vertical with sub items. You could use, like I said, board with groups. Can chain to these status changes really well as tasks move along. You can also just use a simple, we like to use and have implemented for multiple clients, like the checkbox functionality. So you can just call this done. And we may even want to summarize that up. So let's summarize that on the parent. And then let's pull this across all the way over here. Maybe we want it to show here. And let's go, like, just call this task. So where we have a workflow where we kind of know what we need to do, we don't need to assign every single activity or task to it. We can just use the checklist functionality. So I can tick these off and I can start to see here, okay, well, we're moving through this workflow. We're doing the things we need to do, and we're actually, visibly seeing what's getting done. This can be a really great structure for teams struggling with adoption, looking to get out of a manual spreadsheet process and automate it, get visibility, and drive reporting from it. This can be one of the fastest quick wins to do that, and it's a super powerful workflow that's underutilized. Now, what I can also do, like we did before, is when we kind of move to requirements, we could also then chain our sub items here. So let's create those checklist items. So checklist 1 for this particular stage, and then checklist 2. So that's how we can kind of expand on the automations once we have the structure, following that logical approach of groups down into columns, setting up those automations to chain and move down based on our requirements, and creating the checklist items when it makes sense. Now, the last one we're going to go through is another one that I particularly like, and it's a kind of a hybrid approach of this. And this one is really powerful when you want to potentially look at a structure where you're stage gating workflows. So one of those examples might be we go from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3, like this, like we're doing here, but potentially we want to, chunk it into different boards. So we want to have, board 1, which has stage 1, board 2 that has stage 2. The hybrid can be a really useful structure to do that. Now, in this example of the hybrid, we would potentially be using a similar approach in terms of our horizontal with checklist and combining our master overview. But in this example, we'd be focusing more at a milestone level. So we're not necessarily looking at all the stages. We want to track kind of key milestones, but we need more granular detail down in the task list. Now, we're doing this all in one board. Again, this could be a master overview linked to multiple stage gate boards. It really depends on your workflow and what's the most appropriate starting point. You can see here, like our other boards, we've started with upcoming. We've created our active group and our completed. Let's remove our other group that we don't need. And here we're starting to enter our columns. So we've got our assignee like we've had before, timeline, status, budget, effort. And here we're starting to track milestones. So we're looking at milestone 1, milestone for design, development, testing, and delivery. So we're still using our horizontal structure in a way, giving us like enhanced visibility. But in this example, we're also thinking about what do we need to track at the sub-item level. Again, one board today, but this could be split out into multiple stage gate boards and linked up to a master overview as well. Could track initiatives, jobs, projects, people, anything really to make sense in terms of what that structure looks like. Now you can see we have an overall progress bar here. We can change the settings of this and we can turn off status and we can distribute the weight equally, and then we can save this. Something that's also really useful is to look at your customization and what label is being marked as completed. So we set these up for these 5 milestones. We'll get accurate data when it comes to if they're completed in our progress bar. So let's just customize all of these so we get the right data. And then once we've done this, we're going to look at the driving of those sub items. Now with the hybrid, what happens down at the sub item level can drive what happens at these milestone points. So we've done very similar kind of structure to before in terms of what we wanted to look at our sub item level. So we've got our kind of master overview. We've got our horizontal milestone tracking. Now at our sub item level, we've got much more detail. So we're essentially looking at our vertical with sub items. So we've combined our master overview with our horizontal structure approach and our vertical sub item list. You could also expand this out further if you have specific detail boards that also contribute into this process or this workflow. They could also become a part of that with option 1 and option 2 that we demonstrated with a project with groups and a project board as well as a template. So in here, you can see we've got a detailed list of tasks. These are things that we would want to assign to people. Potentially at this level, the main thing that's going to change is we're looking at, okay, for each of these tasks, where do they sit at a milestone level? So what milestones are applicable to those sub items being completed? That's where we can start to really think about a workflow that's going to drive visibility, but also be easy to use. Now, what we would do here is obviously we've got our status column that would be representing our kind of done stage. I'd be looking to add a status column and call it milestone. And in here I would be going, okay, I'm going to call this milestone 1. I'm going to call this milestone 2. And I'm going to call this milestone 3. Now, what we can then start to do is, again, we'd be using that approach like we did in our vertical with sub items, where we'd be structuring up these creation of sub items as a template inside that automation. And we'd also be setting what the milestone points are. So we're saying this is milestone 1. We're saying this is milestone 2. And then maybe we say this one's milestone 3. What we're going to say here in this automation that we start to build is we're going to say when this milestone 1 gets marked as done, it's going to check, okay, yep, it's milestone 1. It's going to update this top level status here to completed. It's then going to push this one to in progress. So again, the things that we execute down at the sub item level are going to be driving the visibility at the high level. A really good hybrid approach, combining our horizontal with our vertical and giving you good visibility, also good reporting, and a seamless workflow depending on what you're running. So what we're going to do is we're going to automate. We're going to go create from scratch. We're then going to go when status changes. So we're going to be down at our sub item level and it changes to done. We want to add a condition there, and only if our sub item milestone is milestone 1, we want to change the status at the top of that project plan to completed, and then maybe we want to put the next one design to in progress. And we're going to click create. Now that can be then replicated for the other milestones. So for example, we duplicate this, we can say change this to milestone 2. We're going to now put design to completed, and then we're going to just shift this along. So we're going to say instead of design, we're going to put development to in progress. You can see how easily that is to create. Again, we would build out this template structure here in our automation for our sub item creation. And then potentially we say for this one, let's just set these back to blank. So as we go through our workflow here, and again, we may want to ladder up and show these on our summary here as well of things that are happening. As I go through and tick these off, nothing will happen because we don't have anything linked here. When this one happens, done, it's going to know, okay, that's milestone 1. It's going to put this as completed and put this to in progress. Now that can be chained again as part of that horizontal with checklist, different groups that you potentially want to move it to, different actions, different things you can then visualize based on your workflow. I'm going to go through and do the same thing for our milestone 2. So we've gone through this process and then we've hit milestone 2. We're now going to mark that completed and put that next one in progress. Really good visibility, really easy to see, and a really powerful kind of workflow. What you can also do with this is combine things, like maybe you have requirements, for example, that there has to be a file attached before this can be marked as completed. You might want to put it back and say you need to upload a file. This can really be a super strong stage gate workflow to get a foundation to build out. Now, hopefully you've got some benefit by looking at how you can start structures in Monday, and the foundation that you start with is always the most powerful. High level, low level, super useful, gives you visibility, but also gives you detail. The ability to structure that low level in different ways, whether it's a board with groups for different projects, whether you use the standard kind of template structure, whether you use vertical with sub items, whether you use a horizontal, which increases visibility and seamless adoption, or you use the hybrid where you can combine those different approaches into a single workflow. The benefit with all of those is that you can mix and match. So you can have different variations of them in different boards connected to different workflows to really build out a seamless solution for your kind of monday.com setup. Now, again, if you want to access this solution, you can access this as a free installable link. We have the entire process set up with documentation, with guides on how you can build out this solution with the full package of automations. So you can see this one, for example, has 20 automations built into it. Our documentation takes you through with text information, how to use it, and then also screen share videos. All of this is free and it gets installed directly in your Monday account with one click. Hopefully you're able to access that, build out something cool. We'd love to hear about what you've been able to create and any of your feedback on those workflow starter foundations and how they've helped you drive efficiency with Monday.